and new books for spring 2016. This is philosophy. So I've got here a little few on education, there's feminism, existentialism, some kind of general stuff, and political philosophy near the bottom. So the first one here, Writings on an Ethical Life by Peter Singer. You may know Peter Singer wrote a lot on ethics, including animal rights, and he's also got in here an essay on vegetarian philosophy. And all of this stuff is actually from other works he's written. So this is kind of one of those books that academics often produce that are kind of the best of some of his other writings. So including stuff from the New York Times, New York Review of Books, etc. So this should be pretty good. I don't have anything on Peter Singer, so that should be good. If I'm going to have anything, then maybe that would be a pretty good compilation. Here's a couple on education. Understanding Skills, Thinking, Feeling, and Caring by Robin Barrow. So this will be a work in philosophy of education and kind of in my area, more for my own research interest than anything. So curriculum and all that. Maria Montessori, The Absorbent Life. I oddly did not have a copy of this, although I have read it and I do have annotations on it. And I actually have a paper that I'm publishing in Maria Montessori in an academic journal. So I guess I'm finding her books in the used bookstores as I see them. I already have a few of them, but I didn't have this one, so now I've got a copy of this. But basically the premise of the Absorbent Mind, of course, is that mind is born to basically soak up the surroundings, in Maria Montessori's educational philosophy, which I believe is the most popular secular private school in the world. Her schools, of course, take advantage of this absorbent mind, and kind of like in the Spencer kind of idea of we should be taking advantage of these natural qualities, unlike maybe the Platonic version, which would suggest we should not. Feminism, A History in Philosophy. I don't have much in feminism. I do have another book in feminism called The Ethics of Care, something like that. I think that's one by Nussbaum. But I don't have a lot in philosophy, and if I were to look through this, it'll be with some prejudice, because I don't think that feminism has been an arm of philosophy. I actually think that, to be very brief, I think that feminism has been kind of an affirmative action program. It's not really been a genuine philosophical school. For example, one of the pillars of feminism is that women, the whole ways of knowing, epistemology, and that women have a different way of accessing the world. But that has been debunked, and that's basically nonsense now. No one really believes that, but feminists that stick around, of course, they don't really want to talk about it, but it's not really anything serious anymore, not a serious consideration. But so this particular book goes through various of the giants in philosophy, like Socrates, Plato, Aristotle, etc., and I guess sees them from a feminist perspective. There's Hegel, Nietzsche, Hume. So I've got that. A few on existentialism. This is Reality, Man, and Existence, Essential Works of Existentialism. So this has Kierkegaard, Sartre, Nietzsche, Jaspers, Martin Buber. I actually had to read Martin Buber in an education course in my master's. We had to study Martin Buber, a Jewish existentialist. He wrote I and Thou and Between Man and Man, and talked about the relationship between people, and then the point of that was to discuss the relationship between the student and the teacher. So, existentialism's basic premise, kind of like the Sartre life is absurd premise, is that we live with bad faith, as Nietzsche calls it. We don't tackle the genuine questions of life on earth, and one of those being that we're all going to die, so why live? The whole idea of life being absurd is that very few people will actually genuinely hold or genuinely accept that fact. Most people just ignore the question. They're not concerned about it. They don't think it's practical to dwell on it. And so in a sense, they ignore it. They ignore the basic circumstances of our existence. And the existentialists don't want to ignore them. Another one in Existentialism, The Rebel by Camus. I've read a little bit into this, but it's been a long time actually since I've touched it, so I don't really recall anything about what I was reading. So, but when I'm finished this, I have been making marks in here. So when I'm finished this, I'm going to probably do a video on it. But maybe I'll take a second here and I'll look to see what I've underlined so far, and I'll give you a bit of a taste of what's going on in the Rebel here. So this actually little piece here is at the very end of the introduction. So he says here, man is the only creature who refuses to be what he is. The problem is to know whether this refusal can only lead to destruction of himself and of others. So that reminds me also of Freud in Civilization and Its Discontents, and he talks about what civilization, some of the consequences of civilization, in that we suppress some of our desires that we may have been able to acquire in the wild. And of course, being Freud, a big one of those is sexual ones, especially polyamory kind of stuff. And Camus is also kind of bringing up this point as civilization may be more fit for another kind of creature almost, which is strange. But there's no doubt that we should take into account what humans are best fit for, and is it possible, how long can we suppress those desires that we cannot have because of civilization? It's a strange question, but it's probably something that very few people consider. So anyways, that's just a little taste. I'm obviously that's not even 10 pages in. But existentialism is pretty broad, and each one of them have kind of different points of view. I think it basically begins with Nietzsche, but then you get the French, that's a German existentialist, and then you get the French existentialist, you get Camus, and you get Sartre, and then you get other people too, like Martin Buber. All right, moving on. This is kind of more general philosophy now. This is another book by Mortimer J Adler, The Four Dimensions of Philosophy, Metaphysical, Moral, Objective, and Categorical. So I've got quite a few books of Adler, and I think he's actually a pretty good writer. He comes from the Aquinas. He's basically I believe he was a Catholic. He's an Aristotelian Catholic, so he's basically St. Thomas Aquinas kind of thinker. And he was very big in the liberal education movement, along with Robert Hutchins out of the University of Chicago. But he wasn't liked much by the academics in philosophy. But he would be probably one of the top 10 philosophers of the 20th century, maybe top 10, who wrote a lot for the public and would have had an influence, especially since he was, I think, the main editor, the general editor of the Encyclopedia Britannica. So he's done a lot of good work for the public. He's someone that you might consider picking up one of his books, like, for example, How to Read a Book. He wrote about various levels of reading and books that you might rush through fast and books that you might slowly take your time with, and how to get the most out of those kinds of books. And I've got a review of that on my old, or not old channel, but my other channel, my main channel. Anyway, so that's another book by Adler there. I've also got, he has another book called The Great Ideas, which is pretty good. And it has, each chapter is on, one's on justice, one's on happiness, one's on government, one's on labor, one's on beauty. Like just these big, if you think of the grandest, most abstract concepts that we have in our I was going to say our language, but maybe in our thinking, then these are the topics that he discusses. And then there's another one, Aristotle for Everybody, which is pretty good. If you don't want to read the bare bones Aristotle works, you could at least read that, and then he kind of translates it into modern English and makes it more accessible. So here's Auguste Comte,